Hi, I'm Josh, and welcome today to my review of Our Share of Night by Marina Enriquez. This is a book that I had on my 5-star prediction list, but I'll be honest, I had little to go on as far as whether or not I actually like it. Because, well, yes, I love a good supernatural horror, one that meshes the real world with some fantastical, dark, cultish, demonic elements. But let's be realistic, the setup of a book can only take us so far. It has to have a good writing style and just a good structure that is sufficient enough to keep me encapsulated and interested. And it is with great pleasure and joy that I tell you now that I actually loved this book, and I would really love to talk to you about what the book does and why I think it worked so well with me. And then you can decide whether or not maybe it's a book you might want to consider giving a try to. Our Share of Night by Marina Enriquez is a book about this cult, specifically focused on this young boy and his father who are basically trying to escape the cult. The young boy is pretty much too young to really understand a lot of things, but what he does know is that his father has this weird ability where he could basically control or either somehow connect to the dead and perhaps even some demonic entities as well. And there's this question of, does his son have the same ability? Because it seems to be the case that he very well might. And this is why they're in the cult to begin with. The father's abilities were what made the cult, sort of caused the cult to seek him out. And he has effectively been trapped in the cult for his entire life. And part of the reason that is because when he was young, he had this terrible heart defect, where he needed significant attention. Cult, they got him, they took care of him, and ever since he's been trapped in this. And now he has his son, and his wife died tragically in the last 6 months or so. And it's basically him trying to figure out how the hell he saves his son from this dark, demonic cult. At the same time, while it is about that journey, it's also about learning about the cult itself. A big part of the story is introducing us to our first set of characters, the father and the son. And then a big chunk of the middle section actually gives us a flashback to where we revisit not his life, the father's life, so much as his wife's life, the one who we know very little about because of the fact that she's been dead. Without saying exactly where things go, eventually that story intersects with the story that we began with, which is to say this father near death because of his heart disease and his son wanting to be controlled by the cult and trying to figure out how to get rid of them. I'll go ahead and tell you from the start, I had one criticism, which was really the structure. I didn't like the feeling of being disconcerted, taken from our story to this period of time that was not completely removed. It just felt disjointed. I don't know how I felt, to be honest. And I think to myself, was there a way for her to tell the story and communicate what she did that was better than this? And that's the thing that I can't think of. And realistically, I don't know if it's a great complaint, because other than that, I thought it was a really effective book. What I loved most about it probably was, I love a good horror book, but there's camp horror and there's horror that's trying to be realistic. And there's always this disconnect between the real world and the horror world, this fantastical creation that's in a different type of book. And it's a really difficult feat, I think, to make it feel real. Not just real within the world they've created. Make it feel as if I'm actually getting a glimpse at my world from a different perspective that I didn't know existed. And part of this comes from my own religious trauma. Raised in the South, young earth creationist, I had a very specific view of the world. To me, I just felt like the creation of this cult, of this demonic infrastructure, this fantasy, was basically a dark fantasy that's very heavy in the horror, to be clear. It felt exactly like I envisioned, like a satanic cult would be. But to say call it satanic is a bit of a stretch. It's actually, I think, more creative than that, because this darkness isn't quite satanic, but it is demonic. And for me, the most immersive part of the story was feeling this world fully realized. And to me, that's what made me able to push through this behemoth of a book, 700 plus pages, because I was just so encapsulated by this story. And to go back to my one complaint, which was that sort of flashback to sort of give us some context how to get here, I think the main reason that didn't work is that I got invested in the father-son. It's really hard not to, and I want to touch more on that in a second. But when I got displaced from that, it was hard to keep my attention for such a big chunk of the book. And when I started to see how it intersected, beyond just the fact that this is the mother and wife, it really, I think, made it work more effectively. This book isn't like a pure 5 stars, maybe 4.5, but for me, it was just that the realization of the characters and of the cult, of the world, that to me was the most successful part of the book. Now, talking about the father and the son, it's a really interesting dynamic because we're made to believe this father truly loves his son and he really wants to save him from this place. But the reality is there's a lot of trauma. There's just so much trauma to unpack in his relationship with his son and his just upbringing in this cult, which is very dark. It's not one of those happy-go-lucky cults, but they pretend to be happy at least. They are almost, I don't want to say they're caricatures. Some of them are just are so ingrained in this guise of this demonic entity of not giving two shits about anyone. Honestly, in some ways, it felt like very class-oriented in that discussion, but that trauma, it leaks into his relationship with his son. And there were times where he is just so blatantly abusive, like on an extraordinary level. And I somehow found myself thinking, well, surely he has an excuse. Surely there's a reason why. And obviously there came a point where I had to stop and reflect, like, Josh, what the fuck is wrong with you? How are you justifying this trauma? And that's part of what I meant by it felt very real. Like, yes, this is a fantastical world, but the exploration of trauma and how we as children can sometimes try to want to believe, hold on to that fact that there must be some good reason why we're going through this. To me, it was very effective. I mean, there is context to it that gets explored later on, but I don't think it's as clean as saying, oh, therefore it was justified. I think it's just a really interesting question to ask of, when is it okay to traumatize, and is it really worth it? Is it really the only option? And I don't know if I explained this very well. It's part of why I haven't made this video sooner, but rather than sort of dwell on what I don't know, I just wanted to come and talk to you about it as frankly as I could. And it was really good. There's the notion of the family relationship, the exploration of trauma, the cult itself, the occult. I'm a big fan of the occult and of demonic things, something I hinted at the beginning of this video. There's also political horror. This was set during the Civil War, the Argentina Civil War. I don't want to say it wasn't an important part. It was more of a backdrop than like a deep context to the story. That said, my background relating to that Civil War is not very significant. Generally speaking, it just felt like, it was a specific type of regime that was existing that sort of helped bolster up this cult. This cult had a significant power. I mentioned class. It's not just an allegory. It's very explicitly said that these people are very wealthy, very powerful. And part of that comes from their occultism and like the power that comes from the satanic or the demonic side. But that also means that they're sort of woven into the warped political structure that exists within Argentina during this time. And because of my lack of knowledge in that, I won't delve into the specifics any more than that. Just saying that's also one of the themes I've explored here. And big picture, it's the story of this family, of this, really the son more than the family. We get the father, we get the mother, but it's the journey of this boy and trying to escape this cult and the search for power and to, I don't know, I'm trying to give it some magical, magnificent weight. And while there is some interesting things explored, really, I loved this book personally just because I thought it was really compelling, really well realized, with characters that were extremely flawed, but also just really captivating and pulled me in. So big picture, should you read this book? I think by now you probably should have a sense of whether this is for you. I've seen other reviews that were critical. I know Scott from Gunpowder Fiction and Plot DNF'd this. He was not here for it. He said it was just a fantasy, which is heavy in the fantasy, part of why I liked it, but not like fantasy, more like supernatural fantasy. And I'm a big fan of that. And it didn't feel like I was reading a fantasy book to me. It felt like just a fully realized world where the supernatural actually exists and what that would mean. And then there's books on Lala that I saw who read this book. I think she didn't love it as much as I did, but in that video she was reading books that were recommended by her favorite authors, and this was recommended, I think, by Cabin at the End of the World, Paul Tremblay. And personally, I think Paul Tremblay is a good representation of what this book feels like. It's heavy in its supernatural aspect, which is to say his books tend to lean on that line of, is it supernatural, is it psychological? And I will say that is somewhat explored here. There were times where I wonder, is this supernatural or is it psychological? But it's that just sort of that ominous, almost that Jacksonian Shirley Jackson-esque tone to the world, where it's also very dark, very ominous, I guess kind of gothic, but probably leaning more horrific and very gory at times, that I really loved. And I love that type of book. I love that atmosphere. I love books that focus on family and family drama and on that sort of trauma, and of course the supernatural. So that's something you can get into. I think this is a book worth reading. Like I said, it's a long book, so it's a big commitment. I realized very early on that this was a book for me. I'm just very happy to say that. I don't have much more to say here. I don't have a good conclusion. I wish I did. These are my thoughts. I hope you have enjoyed this review. I hope you consider giving this book a try. But as always, we all stay safe, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.